I feel like this entire situation should have never happened, but I needed someone to help with rent, so a Craigslist posting later, he moved in. For the sake of the story, let's just call him John. And he tells me that he did have some strange sleeping behaviors like sleep talking, sleepwalking, and night terrors. The funny thing was, I also had a history of sleepwalking, but only on rare occasions. The first incident occurred about 1 week later, when I heard him screaming in the middle of the night. Since we both slept in separate rooms on different sides of the house, the screams sounded distant, but they were enough to scare me so much I'd run to check on him. As soon as I get closer to his bedroom, he would stop screaming, so thinking nothing of it, I just went back to bed. For the next month, he had no issues. I noticed he had no friends or family that would visit, and I never saw or heard him on the phone or texting. Then, another random night, John started screaming again, and the same thing. I got up, started to go to his room, but he would just stop all of a sudden. Then one night, I was woken by screaming in my bedroom. I couldn't see anything in the panic, so I turned on the bedside lamp, and he was just at the foot of my bed. It scared me so much I started screaming as well and woke him up. He apologized and just went back to bed. Then the scariest thing happened. About 2 nights later, I awoke to clanking. It sounded like tools, sort of like hammers tapping. I turned on the light to see John just kneeling down in the corner working on something with his hands. A few seconds later, after turning on the light, John froze. Then slowly turned his upper body around and started staring at me, blankly, while I just lay in bed. I was beyond creeped out, so I slowly slid out of bed and left the house. After sleeping in my truck down the road in an empty church parking lot, I returned to the house at about 8 in the morning. John was gone. All of his belongings were gone. No signs of him anywhere. It was like he had never lived there. I didn't know any of his friends or family, so I had no one to call about him. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Still no sign of John. When I moved out after the lease was up, I was moving furniture out of my bedroom. In the corner of the room, when I last saw John kneeling down, I realized the floor vent of the air conditioning was loose. Inside the floor vent was an envelope with a ton of pictures of me sleeping. The pictures had handwritten dates and times written on the back of the pictures. The only other item was a whittled down wooden broom handle brought to a sharp point. I truly believe John was preparing to kill me that night. It appears John had been coming into my room almost nightly and working on making the broom handle a stabbing weapon, and I never heard him until the last night that I saw him. This happened a few years ago. I was going through a difficult time, so I was looking for a new place to live without big commitments until I figured my life out. I met this guy through a Craigslist posting. He said he had an apartment and was looking for a roommate. I got his name and number, called him, set up a meeting at a public place for a meet and greet. Everything went seemingly fine, and he agreed to show me the place. He seemed super nice and helpful. He was easy to get along with. He was neat and low maintenance, and it didn't bother me that he was a guy. We agreed on no drugs, no parties, no crazy terms. Eventually we agreed on monthly payments, and I moved in a few weeks later. So it was after 2 weeks. One day he comes in early from work and has this very upset voice and claims that we need to talk. He says that I've been acting inappropriately by having my boyfriend stop by on occasion, and it's not even to spend the night or just stay. He just comes in for like 10 minutes every now and then. So I began questioning him, and he just said that made him feel uncomfortable because everyone at the apartment complex thought I was his romantic partner. It then escalated to a point. He said that the entire time he had known me, he was convinced that I was possessed. I knew at this point that shit had totally hit the fan and I needed to get as far away from this fucker as I could. He acted all calm then, saying that I can take my time looking for a new place, and that our arrangement would not work. So I told my boyfriend what happened. I found an apartment I could move into, and had planned to do it the very next day. I told the insane roommate. The next day of my moving out comes, and I walk into the apartment to get my stuff. There is this wooden cross above my room's doorframe. I walk into my room, and it looked like it came straight from a horror movie with creepy candles lit all around my room. I packed up all of my belongings as fast as I could and just left. He sent a message to me later, of course something that had to do with God, and how he was hoping I would face my sins in darkness. I blocked this fucking creep's number after that. I do trust people a lot less and would never have a roommate, and this was the first time ever in my life that I had one. When I was 22, I transferred to a college in California. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29, and her name was Beth. She seemed nice, although a little quiet. But she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like a famous actor. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a thanks. I mean, I looked nothing like him, so it just didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I had seen a room yet. I said no, and so she took me to see it. Her walls were covered in posters of the famous actor mentioned before. She even had printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all of his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. It was a little creepy at the time. The whole night she had been saying I looked like him, and now it was pretty obvious to me that she was obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls all night. I wondered what the hell she could be possibly doing. Occasionally, she would come out and talk for like 2 minutes. And she would always be slurring her words. At the time, I just suspected her drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me from the living room. I would turn and see her and be a little bit surprised and say, "Hello, Beth." And then there would be this long awkward pause, and she would give out her creepy high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. One night I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again. And every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Seeing her standing there in the dark and mumbling my name, it really freaked me out. And it doesn't help that she kind of looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and I tried to sleep. One night I was watching Gladiator and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy segue into the topic, but I just said sure and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into her story, and she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried about that the neighbors were going to call the cops, and she wasn't listening to me when I asked her to lower her volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said, and this really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his fucking throat." That was a big game changer. Suddenly I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening, and she started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I had this feeling before I decided to go to sleep, and I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the door. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning, I went out into the hallway and my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor, right next to my door. I got goosebumps all over my arm. All I could think about was her saying she would slit this guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I always wonder if I hadn't set the dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? Thinking about it still freaks me out.